not to test.
At a rally in Harlem, signs read more teaching, less testing.
From the Pacific Northwest to the Lone Star State, educators are saying enough is enough.
Thousands of parents are opting their kids out of the test.
It is strictly about data and dollars.
The earliest record of standardized testings comes from China, where hopefuls for government jobs had to fill out examinations testing their knowledge of Confucian philosophy and poetry. In the Western world, examiners usually favored giving essays, a tradition stemming from the ancient Greeks' affinity for the Socratic method. But as the Industrial Revolution and the progressive movement of the early 1800s that followed took school-age kids out of their farms and factories and put them behind tables, standardized examinations emerged as an easy way to test large number of students quickly. Throughout Malaysia and other parts of the modern world, many students are familiar with the concepts of standardized testings, from UPSR, PT3 to SPM, or even ONA levels. These tests play a huge role in education. Even from a young age, these students are exposed to standardized tests. However, despite their root of foundation in the current education process, standardized tests contain several flaws ranging from a lack of ideality and/or liability to bias. And yet, schools allow these tests to place stress on students and to measure students' aptitude. During my research, I've met and interviewed a handful of people, mainly consisting of students and teachers from government schools. Based on their experiences, I asked for their opinions on if standardized testings should be implemented in our education system, and if standardized testing is an all-rounder way to determine a student's intelligence. Do you support standardized testings being implemented in our education system?
Well, in the lower levels, yes, but as we get to higher education, then this is due to the fact that in lower levels, standardized testing is a good way to determine whether a student has the basic knowledge required to further his studies. But at higher levels, where things become more complicated and they have to understand, standardized testing might not work because the questions might be too linear to allow complex and complicated situation to actually challenge the student. Basically, in higher levels, you want them to be able to apply and think out of the box. That's like what current universities and companies are looking for.
In your personal opinion, do you think standardized testing is an all-rounder way to determine a student's intelligence?
No, definitely it's not an all-rounder way actually. But you see, standardized test is, I agree that at a young age, at a primary level, I don't think so. So let them grow up with whatever education system they have. They must explore a lot of things in the education system. Then maybe when they go to secondary level, secondary schools, maybe there should be one standardized exam. It is not every 3 years once or 4 years once. I believe in that. I don't really fully support on standardized exams, or I don't disagree also. For me, at least once you must have. Other than that, you can have all the non-standardized tests. Yeah.
I have also set up surveys open to people of all ages about their opinion on standardized testings, and a whopping 90.6% agreed that standardized testing is not a proper way to determine one's intelligence. In addition to that, implementing standardized testing in general would cause a number of impacts towards oneself or to society. One of the many negative impacts that people may not realize is that standardized testings lay a huge load of stress onto students at a young age. Stress is the body's general response to any intense physical, emotional, or mental demand placed on it. A student's reaction, for example, to a teacher's reminder that a final exam will be presented next week may induce stress that triggers the sympathetic division of the autonomic nerves and endocrine systems, according to Nikki Hayes, editor of Foundation of Psychology. Commonly known as exam stress include disturbed sleep patterns, tiredness, worry, irregular sleeping habits, increased infections, and inability to concentrate. According to my survey on standardized testings, it shows that majority agree or strongly agree that standardized testings had inflicted stress onto them at a young age. Unhealthy isn't the proper word, but if I had to choose the best word to describe standardized testings at this point, unhealthy would definitely be it. Unhealthy in the sense that these tests are harmful not physically but to our mental health, as it may come to a point where we wouldn't even be able to function as perfectly normal human beings. Also, here's an interview with a senior assistant from Sri KL Secondary School about their opinion on standardized testing inflicting stress onto students at a young age.
Yes, I think currently that's what is happening in around Malaysia. The majority of the students are being stressed quite far. So some can withstand the stress, but there are a minority which cannot stand the stress, and of course they develop psychological symptoms and so on.
Like depression and so forth.
Depression.
Speaking of depression brings me to my second impact, which is mental illnesses. All that disturbs sleep patterns, lack of sleep, irregular eating habits, and inability to concentrate would be an invitation to mental illnesses such as depression to come knocking on your door. Based on the data collected from my survey, 84.4% of the respondents agree that stress caused by standardized testings lead to depression. Eating disorders, self-harm, and even suicidal tendencies are some of the consequences as people struggle to cope with the enormous pressure to succeed. Students are particularly affected in the competitive environment of government schools, where many feel that exams will determine their path in life and failure is not an option. Along with cultural challenges, transition difficulties, assimilating to new school environments, social pressure and simply pressures of being adolescents are difficult enough. Aside from psychological troubles, pressure can lead to burnout and backfire of the people, who can then give up and lose interest in the area of study. A recent interview with Dr. Shiwil, clinical psychologist and director of the Carbon Clinic in Dubai, said that during his 7 years of practicing in the United Arab Emirates, it has become so common to see people experience extreme stress related to intense academic pressure, so much so that it can drive teenagers to engage in self-destructive behavior, such as cutting, substance abuse, eating disorders, and even suicidal tendencies. In addition to that, standardized testings encourage teachers to teach to the test, which is replacing good teaching practices with rote learning. Teachers teaching to the test basically means teachers only teaching what is most likely coming out for the test, instead of giving their students a deeper understanding on the topic or subject, and it usually ends up in the teacher not finishing the full syllabus. For example, teachers might drill students on a small set of vocabulary words expected to be assessed, rather than employing instructional strategies that help students to develop the kind of rich and broad vocabulary that best contributes to strong reading comprehension. On the other hand, rote learning is a memorization technique based on repetition. Rote learning doesn't allow students to develop a deeper meaning in a subject or extend their understanding by putting the information into good practice. Based on my survey, it can be clearly seen that most respondents agree that their teachers were teaching to the test, and due to that, they did not gain an in-depth learning experience. Here is an interview with Mr. Chu again about his opinion on teachers teaching to the test in his school.
Yes, I think most of the teachers are aware of their responsibility and also the needs of society. The society still look at the piece of paper, and therefore teachers somehow have to do likewise. So they need to train the students to know how to answer the questions in the exam.
What we can deduce from the interview with Mr. Chu is that this issue of teachers teaching to the test is real, and that teachers still carry out this method of teaching to maintain the needs of our society, which is of course a society where our intelligence is based on a piece of paper. By teaching to the test, there will be an increased focus on exam performance, which piles pressure onto both teachers and students, causing them to sacrifice broader learning. Teachers usually teach to the test just so that their professional reputation will not be stained and to maintain a good class average to avoid being questioned by higher authorities. We can't deny that these teachers are just doing what they can to keep their job. But working in a professional field as a teacher, there should also be passion that's involved in teaching. And with passion, teachers wouldn't be teaching to the test. By looking at test results, we can only measure memorization techniques and not the general well-being of a student. If this issue prolongs, students will never develop a rich and broad understanding on their subject. Not only that, but drill-focused form of teaching to the test can crowd out opportunities to teach students more advanced cognitive skills such as how to solve problems and communicate effectively. In addition to that, when rote learning and drill teaching is implemented to study for standardized tests, I couldn't help but question, does this method actually prepare us students, the future of our country, to face the real world? Schools should be preparing our youth for life in the real world, right? Yet, while students are so concerned about what will be coming out on the test, they have very little idea on how they can apply the information throughout their lives. So, what are teachers actually teaching their students? Instead of being able to explain what they can do with the information they have learned, for example, order food at a restaurant from language class, or determining appropriate change while shopping from math class, students often only cite the technical name of a skill they have learned. They are being trained to take exams that require them to ingest information and then spew it all out without real understanding of its importance. For me, this feels problematic. Based on my survey, 83.3% of the respondents said that standardized tests does not prepare them for the real world. From this, we can deduce that this issue is real and that students are not being properly prepared to face the real world after graduating. A lot of people will argue that we need standardized tests, if only because we have no alternative methods of measuring a student's achievement and making sure that all kids are getting a decent education. This is completely false. The only thing that standardized tests do is promote competition and a winner-loser environment by ranking one school, state, or student against another. So, how can parents be certain that their students are learning? Based on the many impacts of standardized testings that I have stated, we can conclude that there are many flaws in our education system. Throughout my research and the data that I have obtained, I came to a conclusion on the alternatives we could use instead of depending solely on standardized tests. The first solution is having performance-based assessments. These are opportunities for children to actually do something. Maybe the conducting of an experiment and the presentation of its results, or even writing a play. Another version of the performance assessment is the portfolio. Students can collect examples of work that they have done over the course of the year or even over the course of multiple years. These types of assessments are far better than standardized or conventional tests at providing data about what students can do and areas where they might need additional help. As for my second alternative, if we continue to use standardized tests, we should do as much as possible to make them less damaging to students. This includes making sure that tests aren't timed and don't include multiple choice questions. It also includes making sure that the results of such tests are not norm-referenced. The results should be considered in absolute terms, meaning with reference to a given standard of achievement, rather than with reference to the scores of other students. Additionally, reports of test scores should be evaluated with consideration given to special challenges faced by certain schools or districts, such as very low-income community, lack of resources, language barriers, and etc. Before this documentary comes to an end, I would like to quote Albert Einstein as he once said, "If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you will spend its whole life believing that it is stupid."